Fresh Economic Thinking podcast, new ideas and analysis with Dr. Cameron Murray and Jonathan Gadir. Do you want to start by telling everyone who's giving us a go why you are doing this podcast?
So I think it's worth knowing that I've been blogging now. I looked it up for over 14 years. So the question, I guess, is an extension of why have I been doing that? And I think the answer is because fresh ideas and thinking differently is difficult. We are just biological beings after all. There's no reason we should have evolved to think logically. And so if you are interested in grasping towards the truth of the world, you need to make a big effort. You need to practice your thinking. You need to test your ideas. You need to dig for those finer details that will show where your thinking is contradictory. And so I think I want to share that process of thinking out loud and having those conversations on this podcast. That's what I do on the blog and now the Substack. And so I'm hoping that people will come with me on that journey. And I think one of the big lessons I've had already is the ability to think beyond what my social group or my networks think and think for myself.
So maybe we should explore just some quick basics since this is the first episode. Quick basics about who is Dr. Cameron Murray, quick bio, where you grew up, what you studied, that kind of thing.
I grew up in Brisbane. Both my parents were teachers. I ended up working in the government, and I learned a lot about the bureaucracy and the political constraints we face. And a funny thing was that I was so frustrated in those roles that I felt like I should do something useful with my life instead of wasting all day being a political pawn in many ways. So I decided to become a medical doctor. And I thought, well, at least I could help people one-on-one on a daily basis.
Wow. So, medical doctor. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I was sick of economics. This was 2012 by now, I think. I was very disillusioned with the whole process. And so I studied for the GAMSTAT, the entrance test for medical school, and did quite well and was accepted to study medicine at UQ in a few months' time. But two things happened, which sort of led me from there to here. First, I followed a doctor friend around the hospital for their shift to see what it was really like. And in a way, the reality hit me that doctors are in many ways human plumbers, human mechanics. They're part of a big system. It's not such a creative endeavor looking for new treatments. There's a lot of day-to-day application of things that are known. It's not always about being creative and trying new things. That's sort of not the whole job. That's a very specialist part of medicine. And then the second thing that happened is I had a conversation with Paul Frieders, who was then a professor at UQ, about my frustrations with economics and the government departments. And we decided that if I did a PhD in economics, I could do some research on some of those issues. And that led me down a new path of learning about grey corruption and ultimately writing the book Game of Mates in 2017. And so now I work at the Henry Halloran Trust at the University of Sydney as a research fellow doing research on housing markets, specifically focusing on planning and housing supply. And in that area too, there's a lot of myths and lies and vested interests, and I'm sure we'll get to some of them, but that's what I do day to day these days. And so let me just ask you some questions now as a background for our listeners. What's your background, Jonathan, and what sparked your interest in economics and policy?
I don't know. I've always been, contrarian. I have this memory when I was thinking about what I'd say in this segment. I remembered this funny time when I was in primary school, and there was this new education minister. I think it was 1988, a new coalition government, and this new education minister whose name I think was Dr. Metherell, whose name became kind of like, it was like the devil, because he was pushing through these cuts to education. And there was a huge campaign in New South Wales from the teachers, against him, and there were protests. And I just remember thinking something along the lines of, well, I don't have that much fun at school. I don't like my teachers that much. So what's so bad about this Dr. Metherell who wants to change something in the school system? And so I thought it was kind of cool to go around saying that I'm a supporter of Dr. Metherell. I remember kind of thinking it was kind of interesting to say something different than what everyone else around me was saying. But anyway,
it's funny you say that.
Yeah.
I feel like that's probably a common theme we both have, and it's in many ways my approach to research is just ask the basic question that a child would ask about a situation. I really feel like children, they don't have that social conditioning to avoid asking straightforward questions like that. If you don't like school and this person wants to change things, well, exactly the point. You're really getting to the heart of the question there, and I like that attitude.
Yeah.
So you were saying, so what about
and at uni,
your interests?
Yeah, well, at uni, I just one of my favorite thinker was not a favorite of any of my lecturers, neither left ones nor the right-wing ones. His name's Immanuel Wallerstein. I still think he's the most influential thinker on me. Immanuel Wallerstein's a grand old man. Well, he's dead now, but he was the grand old man of sort of New York-based sort of Marxist political economy. He authored this magisterial history of global capitalism, the modern world system, volumes 1 through 4, no less.
Wow.
Beginning in what happened in a weird corner of northwestern Europe in the 16th century, where a strange thing happened and the merchants went from the bottom of the social hierarchy to the top. Anyway, so Immanuel Wallerstein was a very influential thinker on me, and he's sort of considered very influential in Marxist third worldy developmental circles. All right, so to the show. I guess the way we're going to do this is, first segment is going to be Barney of the Week. For those who don't know, Barney is British slang for a quarrel, especially a noisy one. Reading that out of the dictionary. And then after Barney of the Week, we'll delve into a topic in a sort of detailed way, something you've written about in your Substack. The Barney of the Week, if we get into that, tell me, what is it? What noisy dispute have you been engaged in?
This week's Barney is about the zoning tax. As I said, my research now is on housing supply, and there is this method out there in academic research of estimating how much of the price of a housing plot of land is caused by some kind of planning regulation. And the Reserve Bank, a couple of people there, Peter Chulp and his co-author in 2017, got a lot of press about this method. And as someone who's worked in property development, been around property a long time, it just made no sense to me at all. And I've picked it apart many times and said, yeah, it makes no sense. This week, an American academic, Brian Kaplan, who's a bit of a libertarian, is writing a book about housing called something like Build Baby Build. That's the latest thing to say in certain social circles. If you ever want to talk about housing, you just go, oh, we've got to build more, it's supply, and you've signaled your credibility as an informed blue check on Twitter.
Okay. Yeah.
The problem, of course, is that Brian Kaplan's writing this book, and he's put up on his Substack a criticism of my criticism of this method. And so we're back to where we were years ago, arguing about this. Now, why is this important? Well, if supply really is having huge price effects, and let me give you an example. When the method was applied to some Sydney data, when the average price of a new housing lot for a detached home in Sydney was $765,000, the estimate says, well, 64% of that, or $490,000, was just money you're blowing because of council regulations on housing.
Okay.
So if you got rid of them, that $765,000 lot would only cost you $275,000.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's the argument. And if that were true, then we could crash the property market tomorrow by announcing a change in planning laws, and we could wipe out $4 or $5 trillion of value from the Australian property market with the
Okay.
stroke of a pen.
Yeah.
Now, when that method first came out in 2001, it was at a conference, and it was the discussant for that research said, well, this method is too ditzy to go anywhere. But it's become super popular and everyone pretends it's true. And so we end up with these massive sort of estimates out there. And I see that being a huge distraction of what you can do in the housing market to make housing more affordable for renters and new buyers. Now, I'll try and explain the method because it's kind of weird. And basically what it says is if large housing lots are priced at a lower price per square meter than smaller ones. So let me give you an example. If a 400 square meter housing lot was priced at 400,000, if a 700 square meter housing lot in that neighborhood, empty, a vacant lot, was priced at less than 700,000, which would be the 1,000 a square meter for all that. So say it was 600,000. This method would say, because you can buy bigger lots at a cheaper price than smaller lots per square meter, there is a zoning tax, because what you should be able to do is take, for example, 3 of those big lots and chop them up into 5 smaller lots and make money. And if you're not doing that, it must be because zoning rules aren't letting you subdivide the lots.
Okay.
And of course, the problem here is that you can't just chop up housing lots. Because all housing lots are at different locations. And once you put a house on it, it's very expensive to reorganize them. And this was the exact critique that came out literally 30 minutes after this method was first presented at the conference. Someone came out and said, this doesn't really make sense. Maybe it captures something, but probably don't use it. And like many things in academia, people just stopped caring. They became unserious and just kept picking up things that gave them the answer they wanted for when they did their research and they cited it and so on and so forth. So we're in this weird situation where there's a big social pressure to conform to this idea that it's nasty white people in their expensive detached housing who lobby councils not to let apartments get built in their neighborhood, who are causing the global housing boom.
Oh, okay. I didn't know there were people saying that. I mean, it may well be that it's a bad thing that white people have big houses and they're NIMBY-ish and it's really annoying. But I didn't realize that there was a whole argument out there that it's actually this is actually the cause of expensive housing.
Yeah, so it's become a very, politically embedded thing. That's why I'm going on about how it's, rich white people in detached housing. This is just the attitude that you have to express to be part of the cool club when it comes to just debates about housing. And that's where I find this, I get into all these arguments with people who are unserious about what the method actually does and the inconsistencies behind it. So that's, and I'm still arguing about it 5 years later.
Okay, and forgive the sort of lack of knowledge, but like, who are the people? Like, are the people who are arguing against you? Are they kind of partisan, political motivated, or just generally kind of lefty progressives? Like, who are they?
Oh, that's really interesting that you say that. Mostly it's sort of libertarian right-wing people. So Peter Tulip's at the Centre for Independent Studies.
Because they're anti-regulation. I get it. Okay.
They're anti-regulation. But what I find interesting is that many on the left have essentially picked up the same, what 40 years ago would have been crazy right-wing, propaganda funded by vested interests. And they've just picked it up and go, no, that's also true. Yeah. Because it's got this sort of element of inequality and race and all these other elements mixed in. You now get to go, oh yeah, well, that regulation is racist or whatever. And it's keeping poor people out of expensive neighborhoods. And so there's this other group now that's jumped on board. And I'm just the lonely guy there saying, I don't care who's right or wrong. This method just doesn't do anything that you think it does. Please stop using it. And no one seems to care.
Okay. And if anyone wants to join in the Barney, they can look up your Twitter.
Of course.
All right.
So it's an ongoing battle, that one.
Yeah. Okay, good. So that's our Barney of the week. Now on to our topic of the week, which is going to be like the most juicy one that will get people coming back, tuning in for more of our episodes. So what is it?
Superannuation.
Of course it is. You got an article in the Herald in the lead up to the election on this, didn't you?
I did. I didn't like the headline. I think if you're out there and you're listening to this podcast, be aware that the authors do not write the headlines for newspaper articles.
Oh, what was the headline again?
The headline was something to do with the coalition's proposal to use super for housing. But the article was about how I went from a super fan to super's biggest critic. We've just had a strange federal election in Australia where the left has been pushing for more superannuation, that is more compulsory savings for young people, where they, instead of getting their wages paid in their bank account, they have to put their wages, give them to a fund manager to go and purchase financial assets on their behalf. And where the right wing was saying, actually, if people had their own wages that they earned, instead of buying financial assets, bought property assets and lived in their own home, that would be better. So it was very, very, very bizarre. And so I guess what's interesting about this topic is, if you had asked me a decade ago, is superannuation good? I probably would have gone with my biases, being brought up in a household where thriftiness was rewarded or nurtured. Yep. I would have thought, people are idiots, got to force them to save money or they'll never have any money. I think that's a gut feeling a lot of people have, right?
Yeah, that's me. That's me. I would have thought that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was a bit like that. And the problem I had is every time I kept taking a step further in my research, okay, well, why is having super good? What's bad about the age pension? What's bad about taxes, or what's good about that system? And what does super actually do? Like, we think about, you get the magic of compound growth. I'm like, well, okay, but doesn't the tax system automatically get the magic of compound growth across the economy also to make the age pension system sustainable? Like, where is the magic pudding here of super? And so a few things I learned over time really changed my view. And I can tell you where I got to. Where I got to in 2019 was I wrote a report called Scrap Superannuation. And I proposed that the best thing to do for economic efficiency and equality in Australia is to stop putting money in super, put it in people's bank accounts when they earn their wage, and let people take money out of their super to spend however they like at a certain annual cap each year until there is no super system left. That's what I proposed. So what did I learn in the meantime to get from there to here?
Yeah.
And
I was going to say,
where do you fall on it?
So I was going to say, the more I think about it, the more I think that it's dodgy. The super is dodgy, but I couldn't put it into, well, look, the standard left line, which I heard on Friendly Geordies, is my guilty pleasure podcast listening, was people won't save by themselves. It's there to, the super system's there to protect the poor in their retirement. It's there because the pension is not sustainable. Like, we can't have the government, we can't rely on the fact that the government's going to have enough money in the future to pay sort of these enormous numbers of people who are going to need it a really decent pension. And then I start interrogating myself, and I think, well, that's not a structure of argument you find left-wing progressive people making on any other issue. They don't go around saying, well, we can't expect in the future the government to pay this incredibly growing amount of money for health, or this this insatiable demand for education. And it's just growing and growing, and we just can't expect the government to and I wonder, I don't say that about anything else, but I say that about pensions, like, and then I
Yeah.
think, why am I thinking that about pensions? Is it because Paul Keating said it once and he's a really interesting guy and I kind of think I should agree with him because he sounds smart? Maybe that's what it is. Because I remember
Yeah.
Keating like shoving that down everyone's throat.
Look, I think Paul Keating's a key figure here, and the leftists sort of backed themselves into a corner by sort of worshipping him in many ways. And so there's a few things that tripped me up and sort of made me question my, the gut reaction that I think everyone has is that, savings is noble and good and prudent. And I think there's a deep social conviction that saving is somehow noble. But, retirement and saving are different things for starters. But let me give you a few things that I learned that made me really question things. Well, firstly, the fees on and the tax breaks to superannuation. So it's something like, so compared to the age pension, we pay $45 billion per year in age pensions. The tax breaks to superannuation are nearly 40 billion already each year. So they nearly are enough to cover the age pension. And the fees that we pay to superannuation fund managers are around 30 billion. So just the fees and the missed taxes are 75% more than the whole age pension is already. And yet we somehow think this system is rescuing the expense of the age pension when the system is already creeping up to twice as expensive. The other thing that I learned in the process was that for the bottom 25 to 30% of households, when they age onto the age pension, they get a pay rise.
Yeah.
They get more money when they get the age pension than they had beforehand. Yet the day before that birthday, the attitude is, oh, you don't know what to do with your money. You need less money now. All this sort of stuff. Go and buy BHP shares. You don't have anything to do with your money. And the day after, it's like, oh, we must give you more money. You're very, very needy. You've had a birthday. Here's $30,000 tax-free each year. Oh, you own $1 million house, whatever. So
Okay, but here I am, Mr. Standard leftist conventional wisdom. I'm going to give you the argument. But you're assuming that in the future, when there's way more people who are retiring and in need of income without working, that the government's going to be able to keep paying a good living pension, not a pension that means I'm living in a boarding house.
Of course they can, right? Because the pension you tax some people and you pay others. And this is the thing. The superannuation system does the exact same thing. It compulsorily forces you to go and buy shares off the retiree who's the self-funded from their super. They sell you their shares to get them cash. So you essentially give that retired person cash when you pay in your superannuation account, because there's a bunch of retirees out there selling the assets to you. So you're just giving them cash anyway. And so a lot of countries, they don't distinguish superannuation and taxes. They say they're just non-tax compulsory payments. They're essentially identical, economically speaking. And they're identical. They're just literally transfers from the young to the old. And so if there is an aging problem with the pension that we can't afford it, it's also true for the super system that if there's too many old people, there simply won't be enough young people able to make superannuation payments to support those incomes. So that's just not an argument that stands up to scrutiny. And the fact that the left keeps saying it is, and in the process, $30 billion of fees to essentially spreadsheet monkeys who trade the same assets with each other with your retirement savings every day. It baffles my mind that this is a pro-left-wing progressive system. The other thing people don't realize is that half of the payments out of the super system are lump sum payments to people who are, I think you could get your super at 55, but now it's 57. So in that decade before retirement age, because the age pension age is now 67, which I think was a mistake by, again, our left-wing political party increasing the retirement age from 65 to 67. I just cannot see how, a 65-year-old who's worked their whole life in a physical job, whose body's, shot to pieces because they've been lugging stuff around construction sites for 45 years, is somehow undeserving of the age pension. I find it completely bizarre. But anyway,
Yeah. Can I also ask, say there's two things, and maybe you can comment on this from an expert perspective. There's two things that made me sort of doubt in the back of my mind whether the super system was actually a good one. And the first thing was I could never, ever compare or shop around effectively. The way that the fees and the costs and the interests and all that was presented was just for a normal person, just completely made it completely impossible to say, okay, this super fund over here is better for me than that super fund, and I'm changing.
Yeah.
And I thought, there's something odd going on here if it's made so opaque. And the second thing is the fact that I could never get really a good answer as to what would happen if there was a massive stock market crash just the day before I retired. So could you comment on those two things?
Oh, that happened in 2008. The super system, the value of it fell over 20% in the 2008-9 period. And just remember, this balance is what people say, it's there, it's real, you know. You don't want an unfunded pension. That value is real. I'm like, the value is not real.
So what's the government's plan if that happens?
They just pay the pension. I mean, the pension is the insurance system. And this was my point earlier. Half the withdrawals from super are lump sum, and people just spend it so that as quick as they can to get on the age pension. And all the financial advisors I talk to say, yeah, take as much super as you can, spend it, and then get on the age pension. And people are using their super to repay their home loans, so they're already using it to buy housing. Self-managed funds are buying housing for investment. The last thing we need is for young working families to get less of their money when they're young, poor, low income, with children and high expenses, so that when they're old and wealthy and have the age pension to fall back on, that they can have more money then. So I just find it it's really bizarre, and
there's like very few issues that elicit such certainty and such fervor as, you know, defense of the superannuation system by left-wing union forces, or etc.
I'll give you an example. I was at a dinner party with some friends and friends of friends, and a couple of years ago when I was writing this report in 2019, and I asked them, you know, they worked for a union, and I said, what do you really think about super? What do you really think? Is it good or bad? And they said, they looked up like they were thinking of an answer, and they said, what's our view again? And I said, no, what's your view? What do you really think? Not what does the union say, what's my talking point? Have you really reflected on, is it good for you? Would you like more money now? Like, because that's the alternative. There's this sort of, in many ways, a hidden or an implication that the left wants, that it's somehow free money that business owners are paying to you.
Yeah.
That without super, you wouldn't have got that money. It would have just been profits. And I say, okay, if that's true, we'll keep the super system, but every month you can withdraw $5,000. So the business owners still have to pay it. You're not going to lose it. You can just spend it however you like. You know, they're like, oh. Well, I'm like, well, if it's free money, why don't we just make it bigger? And then as a bonus, we'll let you spend it today. What's better than free money in the future? Free money today. And then, it blows their minds because, they're just unserious. It's not about, is it a good system? Is it fair? Does it work? It's about, what's my politics? What's my tribe say? What's the appropriate thing I should say? And it's just, this is so common in so many areas, and no doubt it will come up again. So what's your view now? Have you obviously started like I did, Jono, sort of having that gut instinct for saving, and a few things changed. Are you all the way to scrap the whole system?
Well, I guess I'd admit a lot of it was being nudged into thinking more carefully about it by reading stuff by you, but also, like, there are all sorts of, let's say, non-economic, let's just call them irrational cultural prejudices, cultural practices around money, when and how and what circumstances it's appropriate to spend
Mm-hmm.
versus it's, where it's not, where it's deemed to be a bad thing. So someone once told me, an economically trained friend once told me, you should be salary sacrificing as much as you can into super for tax reasons.
Yeah.
You
Wow. Okay.
you'll say, you won't, but then I was thinking to myself, well, what if I need the money now to spend on things that I like to do now, like travel and, maybe if I have kids or whatever. And the implication behind his advice was that it's super, super important, more important than anything else, to be
Yeah.
taxed less. What do you think?
No, I'm totally with you on that, because I remember having young kids at daycare and being a student, and um, just thinking, oh my God, like, why, when else am I going to need money but now? And now I have two teenagers at school, and the money just drips through your fingers. And the question is, well, I'm only going to be richer than I am now in the future, assuming all goes well. Why would I want more money then and less now? Um, and and your point about the cultural norms about what's good to spend money on, I think that informs a lot of the welfare debate as well. Like,
Oh, yeah.
can't, yeah, I think it's that same thing. Like, what people spend money on, everyone's got an opinion about what others should spend their money on. And I don't know how to sidestep that when it comes to policy questions like this. So, for example, we've got the left raging about the indue card. You've heard about this card that welfare recipients are meant to use, so they get paid into this sort of debit card, and that card won't work at bottle-os, or at the casino, or whatever the case may be. And so you're essentially directing the way welfare recipients can spend money. And the left comes out and says that's terrible. And they're right. Like, if that's the case, we should pay our politicians on one of these cards, because we would not want our people in these positions of power just drinking and gambling all the time with their
Yeah.
money
Yeah,
that we pay
exactly.
them, right?
Yep. Yep.
So the point is completely valid. Now, if you go, it's probably not a good idea for Stevie there and his wife Jane, who are 22 years old, who've just had twins, and he works as a laborer. And now what you're doing is saying, sorry, Steve, I know you got those twins and stuff, but the best thing for you to do is to pay this guy your money, and he's going to go and speculate on Tesla shares and commodities for you, and buy some treasury bonds, because that's what you really need. I'm like, well, what's the difference here? What's the difference? Clearly, that's not what this guy needs. He probably needs a drink on a Friday afternoon after laboring all day, and he's got twins. Like, I just don't see why that's different. And it's just this cultural thing of, oh, we know what's best for other people to spend their money on. It's kind of weird.
But there's
Brought it
also a
up.
denial by people that, hey, it's going to speculate on the stock market. That's not, it's not sitting there in a vault waiting for you to hit the right age. It might not be there.
Yeah,
That's very
yeah. People don't get that. And the weird thing, and this is what bugs me most of all.
Mm.
The OECD, the World Bank, all these economic institutions, they buy all this. They publish, and economic professors spend a career saying, what's worth, they call it an unfunded pension system, where you just tax people and give old people money. And they go, oh, you can't have unfunded pensions. You need fully funded pensions, or your country's going to go broke. I'm like, have you even read the economics textbooks? Like, you're just contradicting yourselves. If the money's there to be taxed, the money's there. Like, it's
what
not
do you mean
like
it's contradictory? Do you mean like that's how everything is paid for? Like,
yeah, that's how everything's paid for. It's by transferring resources to the old people when they spend them. It's not. So there's this weird thing in economics where we talk about real resources. And so the idea is, if we spend less today, we can have more in the future, because instead of spending on food or clothing or things that deteriorate real quick, we can build bridges or do other things that last a long time, and we can consume those things in the future. And so in an economic world, people will conflate two things. They'll go, oh, super is savings, therefore it's giving us more in the future. but it's not. It's swapping who owns a piece of paper that says I own Tesla shares or BHP or this treasury bond, right? And what would really provide more stuff in the future is if you stockpiled. Oh, here's a car. I'm going to buy it today, but I'm not going to drive it. I'm going to save that for my retirement, put it in the garage. And here's a suitcase full of clothes that I'm going to buy today. I'm going to stockpile them and put it in my garage. And here's some canned food. I put it in my garage. That is what the model that we often use when we tell ourselves that saving now provides us more goods in the future. What they mean is we produce an item and we don't consume it today, we stockpile it for the future. And therefore, when we retire, we have all this stuff. And that's kind of weird for two reasons. One, that's not what the super system does. And two, if you had more money today, you would have a car and a house and better clothes and stuff that would last you when you retire. That's one of the reasons people don't spend much when they retire, because they have stockpiled all the household furniture, the car, all those things. So their expenditure is very, very low when they retire. But if we don't have the money now, we can't do as much of that. So, maybe we'll talk more about this weird sort of economic analysis that we traditionally use, talking about real goods and services, not financial assets. But that's just one of those mysteries where the OECD will say that this is a funded pension, as if the things that retirees are going to consume are being stockpiled somewhere in sheds, rather than it just being a change of ownership of assets that are listed on a computer somewhere.
Okay.
And they don't care that it contradicts their sort of view.
Well, that's great for a first episode, and I will put some links in the show notes, and we'll make that a habit. And I'll also put email address for the pod, and your Twitter and my Twitter, and invite people to suggest things they want discussed.
All right, great to chat. Let's do it again soon.